Good morning. Let's begin with a new topic today, which is heat transfer because of free, or as we call as natural convection. So we've been looking at forced convection scenarios so far. There was some external source or an external system that was driving the flow over a substance or over a solid which we were trying to cool or maybe heat. Now we will deal with scenarios where there is no forced velocity, rather but still, even though there's no forced velocity, but convection still exists. And basically this convection that we will talk about, and we will do a very specific scenario. This convection will arise because of buoyancy effects and or buoyancy force, and this will happen. Typically it originates when you have a body force that is acting on the fluid, and in that fluid there are also density gradients. So when we have body force along with density gradients, that would be the initiator of this free convection mode. Now in most cases we will also see that density gradients appear because of not because of on their own, but because of a temperature gradient. So we will look at density gradients that come because of temperature gradient in the fluid. And we will also see that in these kinds of or in this mode specifically, the velocities are much lower as compared to forced convection velocities, because of which the heat transfer coefficient in free convection, you will see, would be much lower than the heat transfer coefficient in forced convection. So that is of course something that we have to work with. But then the question comes in that if the free convection heat transfer coefficient is lower as compared to forced convection heat transfer coefficient, why do we even care about it? Why not? Why not? We know that the lower heat transfer coefficient would mean a lower amount of heat transfer. So why do we even bother about this mode? And why not just work with forced convection in all engineering problems? Now, it so happens that in scenarios where we want to minimize cost of an external heat exchanger device, and we'll talk about heat exchangers very soon now in this course. So when we want to minimize the cost of an external system or another heat exchange device, which would employ forced convection, when that is under consideration, then free convection happens to be a mode that we can easily rely on, because this will happen automatically, or without any external forcing action. So free convection also has a huge significance, and that is what we will try and understand in today's lecture. Now normally we will see that when we in any engineering or in any fluid that we generally deal with in our engineering practice, typically the change of density with temperature is less than zero, or it's negative. So that as the temperature increases, the density of a fluid decreases. In general, I have not come across a fluid where this opposite of this may be true, but in general this is what is typically seen. So we will focus on scenarios, as I said, because I was mentioning that body temperature gradients are what induce density gradients. So we will actually focus on situations in which the density gradient is due to a temperature gradient. Okay, and we will also specifically in this course deal only with body forces which are gravitational, or the gravitation force of gravity will be the body force that we will work with throughout. Now, how does free convection come into place? So let me take an example. Let's say we have a sort of like an let's say a fluid that is trapped between, let's say, two parallel plates. I don't care about the size of the plates right now, but this is just a thought experiment that I'm doing with you guys. So let's not worry about how long the plates are or what is the separation between the plates. That is immaterial as of now. So say the top plate is at some temperature T1, The bottom plate is at some temperature T2, and as I said, it has a fluid within. There's a fluid which is trapped between these two plates. Let's say the gravity. In usual, we talk about gravity acting downwards, and let me choose my coordinate system in such a way that I determine the coordinate y from the top plate. So any direction going downwards is positive for now. Let's say. Okay. Now we'll consider two scenarios. Let's say scenario one is a case where T1 say is more than T2. This is scenario. Let's say the first scenario that we're dealing with. Now, if T1 is more than T2, I know that in terms of, if I just look at it in the problem in a little mathematical form, clearly dt dy, which is a change of temperature or change of temperature with distance y, is less than zero because T1 is more than T2, and because I said d rho dt is negative, d rho dy will be positive. Now, physically, what we expect is that the fluid near the top plate, and the top plate is a hotter plate as compared to the bottom plate, the fluid near the top plate will come in contact with the surface, which is hot, and will actually acquire the temperature. And then the fluid on the bottom will actually acquire a lower temperature, which is maybe T2. But the hotter fluid is up, the cooler fluid is down, because of which the hotter fluid, because of buoyancy, it's lighter, so it will remain up, and the cooler fluid will remain down. And so there would be, we don't expect any motion in this fluid. The hotter one stays up, the cooler one stays down. Thereby what it does is that at steady state, the temperature profile, if I can draw it here, would be a linear profile going from T1 to T2. So this is temperature, or the heat transfer will be only because of conduction. And the density might have some, depending on how density varies with temperature, the density may have some a variation of that type, that the lower fluid has a higher density, the upper fluid has a lower density. So at steady state, the mode of heat transfer here is only conduction, because there is no motion, no bulk motion. Now say we look at a second scenario, and let me just divide this to say that this is the second scenario. Okay, so this is not the same thing, but let's say in the next case we take T1 to be less than T2. Now the problem gets interesting, because I know that, again, mathematically dt dy is actually greater than 0, and d rho dy is less than 0. What we expect is that the fluid near the bottom plate will actually now become, or will acquire the higher temperature. It will become lighter, and it will try and rise. It will try and rise because of it's lighter and the gravity is going downwards, so it will try and rise. And the upper fluid, which is the heavier fluid, being in contact with the lower temperature, will actually try and displace or take its place, if I can say it. Will take the place of the rising fluid. But here comes a catch. That does it happen instantaneously or automatically? So it so happens that if you look at the forces which are creating this, or which may create some kind of a recirculation pattern in this fluid, those forces are actually impeded by viscous forces within the fluid. So even though the fluid wants to rise, viscous forces are actually going to try and keep it down until we reach a critical temperature difference, which is the T2, or we reach a difference, let's say, which is T2 minus T1, which is sufficiently large that the buoyancy force overcomes the force of, or overcomes the viscous forces, and so we get a recirculation pattern which may be established of that type. So you will have the hotter fluid rising up and the cooler fluid coming down. And at steady state now, of course, this is a problem that we will now work out. At steady state now, we because there's bulk motion in the fluid, so the mode is not conduction, it is actually what we call as free convection. So the temperature profile will actually be maybe something like this. So temperature goes from T1 to T2, and the density may actually go something like that. So this, what we need to make this flow happen, or this forced free convection to be established, is some kind of an instability in the flow. And we'll talk about the instability today. We need some instability to be able to, for the buoyancy force to overcome the viscous force and establish a bulk motion. Okay, so this is an example of free convection, the simplest example that I can give. And so what we'll do is, we look at some or different classifications of free convection, and we will focus on only one type in this course because we have limited time. But I will just try and explain to you what are the different ways in which free convection can be classified. And the classification is basically quite simply in terms of whether the convection happens when it's bounded by a surface, or it happens without any surface bounding it. So what it means is, let's say the first classification is from based on whether the flow is bounded by a surface, and the second is what is called as a free boundary flow. So what I mean by flow being bounded by a surface is, or the simple example of that is flow, a convection happening from a vertical plate, which could be either hot or cold. Now, please remember, even though I gave you an example of maybe the upper plate being cooler as compared to the lower plate, so basically the lower plate being at a higher temperature, we will see that free convection does not necessarily mean that you need that we are always talking about heat transfer from a hotter surface. Sometimes we can also have a hotter fluid having free convection from a cooler surface, and that is what uh, that is, there's some examples that I will actually show. And so maybe it's not very clear right now, but we'll come to that. So say we have a vertical plate, and so vertical plate would mean that anything to the left of it is actually in the solid, and we are the fluid is on the on the left side. So we have a quiescent fluid here. Quiescent basically means that the far field velocity is zero, that the fluid far away is at zero velocity. We can choose some coordinate system for this. Typically the coordinates, the way they're chosen is, we take the length or the distance along the plate as x, and the coordinate perpendicular to the plate as y, very similar to the way we did in forced convection. Say that the temperature of the surface is more than the free stream or the quiescent fluid temperature. So the quiescent fluid is at T infinity and rho infinity, and gravity is downwards. So what we expect is that the fluid, as it comes in contact with the hotter surface, will actually have a decrease, will its density will decrease and it will rise. And as it rises from, so if we have a leading edge at the bottom, as it rises, it also, the boundary layer or the region in which the flow really takes place will actually get wider. So we will get a flow of that type. And so at any given location x, if I had to draw the velocity profile, we would have a velocity profile which would be somewhat of that type. So this is, let's say, u of y at some distance x. Note that the velocity is actually going to nearly zero because the free stream or the quiescent fluid is at zero velocity. So this is an example of, the vertical plate is an example of flow bounded by a surface, because we need a surface for a hotter surface or a cooler surface for the flow to happen. Now, the cooler surface system will work if I had the surface being at a lower temperature as compared to the surrounding fluid, because of which the heavier fluid will now go down. Okay, in this case, the lighter fluid is going up. In that case, the heavier fluid will flow down. There's one more terminology that I can use, that we define again velocity u, component u along x, and component v along y. So just to reiterate that, because this is something that I will be using uh, very soon. Now, the case of free boundary flow, of course, you need some surface to be able to initiate the flow. Otherwise, how will convection, free convection even happen? But a free boundary flow, a simple example of that could be that you have a heated, let's say, wire. Okay, you have a heated wire which is suspended again in a quiescent fluid, and so it's suspended in, let's say, in an extensive quiescent fluid. Quiescent, I already said, quiescent means that the far field velocity is zero. Extensive basically means that the fluid is infinite. So this wire is just somewhere in air, or in some fluid, and the fluid just extends to all, to infinity on all sides. I mean, of course, that's an idealization, but that is what we're saying. It's much. The scope of it is much wider, or much larger as compared to the diameter of the wire. Say gravity was again downwards. Okay, in this case, so what we expect is that there would be a plume that will be created around this wire. So the fluid which comes in contact with the wire will get heat up. It will heat it up. It will rise. But as it rises, it creates a plume which would look like that. And so the velocity, and I'm just going to use some guidelines for my drawing here. So the velocity profile would show a maximum at the center, and decrease to zero far away. Now, what is going on in this case is that as the fluid is rising, as it's moving, and the fluid around, I mean, the fluid outside, or the cooler fluid, uh, basically comes in contact with the hotter fluid which is rising up. So the quiescent fluid tends to get entrained into this flow. So entrainment basically means that it gets pulled into this flow because of momentum of this rising hotter fluid. So there is, we typically see this entrainment in many scenarios in heat transfer. So entrainment basically is that something is getting pulled. So the plume is also getting wider. Okay, it is growing in size. So it's growing because there is more and more fluid being pulled in, and it can only go to a certain point. Beyond a point, this will actually, the momentum reduces so much that it cannot rise any further, and basically sometimes it can even turn into a turbulent plume, and or you start seeing this wavy pattern. Okay. uh, so this is one example of a free boundary flow. The other example, which is quite unique, and your book also uses it, and it actually makes us think, what is free bound, or what is free convection. So say we have a some kind of a discharge from a pipe. Okay, or something that we bring in. So there's some fluid coming in, and say the fluid is at a higher temperature as compared to the surrounding fluid. So say you have a hot air jet that you bring in, and let's say we discharge it horizontally. Again, let me say gravity is downwards always. So let's say I'm discharging this hot jet in this air, or it could be hot water being discharged into a maybe a tank of cold water. So what we would see is that because of the inherent momentum of the fluid, it will first of all travel horizontally because it's coming in a horizontal direction. But then as it comes in horizontally, and if it's a hotter fluid, it will actually tend to uh, the hotter fluid, because it's coming in, it would actually it will bring in buoyancy effects, because of which this hotter fluid will actually start rising upwards. So what we will see would be a flow of this type. So we'll see a buoyancy force being taking this hotter fluid higher, and again entrainment coming in, because the momentum of the fluid coming in will actually pull the surrounding fluid with it. So the density inside this jet, what I'm going to call as a buoyant jet, the density inside the buoyant jet would be less than the density of the quiescent fluid, and the temperature would of course be more than the temperature of the quiescent fluid. Okay, so the vertical motion is only because of buoyancy, and that is also an example of free convection flow, because had there been no density change with temperature, this jet would have actually maybe gone a little more distance and maybe went started going downwards. Okay, so these are examples of free convection flows. Now what we will do, as I was saying earlier, that we will focus mainly on flows bounded by a surface, because these scenarios are also quite commonly seen in the kind of mechanical engineering systems that we deal with, and many scenarios can actually be also approximated by some kind of a flat surface or a fluid being exposed or coming in contact with a flat surface which is hotter or cooler. So to develop the analysis for this, let's look at what would be the governing equations for a problem of this kind. And let's say we again, as I said, we will deal with flow over a, let's say, a vertical surface as an example. Say we have the coordinates as I said earlier, okay, and gravity being downwards, and we are trying to calculate the properties of this boundary layer, if I can call it, right? It's a boundary layer because this fluid is rising. So if you can calculate the properties of this rising fluid, and remember that the properties will, we are not even only concerned about velocity, we are also concerned about the local heat transfer coefficient. So if I know the local heat transfer coefficient at any given location, I can actually calculate from Newton's law of cooling the heat transfer or the flux at that particular location. So that is the whole idea why we are doing this. So we'll assume, or we'll make some assumptions. So we'll assume for now that the flow is 2D. We will assume that it's steady, and we will also assume that the properties are constant, or that they don't change with temperature. We will make one key assumption here. We will assume that the fluid is incompressible, except that we will take variable density in the buoyancy force. This assumption is the basis for, or is based on the development that was done by Boussinesq in developing this theory. So this is also called as Boussinesq assumption or approximation. So what the Boussinesq approximation is saying or says is that for all other cases or all other terms in the governing equation, the fluid will be assumed to be incompressible, except when we deal with the body force, because the body force is what is sustaining this, or the buoyancy force is what is sustaining this flow. So there we will assume that the density is changing. Okay, now the other thing that we will also assume is that the boundary layer assumptions that we've been making for force convection, You may recall that we said there's some certain gradients can be removed because in those directions properties don't or the specific variable doesn't change dramatically as compared to some other direction. So boundary layer approximations are going to be or are going to also taken to be valid. So we'll assume that boundary layer approximations are valid. So we can write the momentum equation. Continuity, we know what continuity will just give me du dx plus dv dy is 0. So I'm not very concerned about that. So for example, when I was saying that we will assume the fluid is incompressible, so that means that the continuity remains du dx plus dv dy is 0. If it was not, if it was not incompressible, then I could not have written that. So I'm not. So there we can assume the density is constant. But let's look at the momentum equation. So the x momentum equation will be u du dx plus v du dy is minus 1 by rho dp dx plus nu d2u dy square minus g. Now we have a body force, of course. So far we've not taken body forces in the problem. Now, of course, again here I'm assuming. Remember, we said in boundary layer analysis, gradients along x along the flow are smaller as compared to gradients in the transverse direction. So du dx doesn't appear, but du dy or the derivative d2u dy square is there. The y momentum equation, which I'm not going to work out here, but very similar to again force convection, this comes down to dp dy is 0, and which means p is a function of x only. So we'll use this information now. But how do we use this? That is even better. That's quite a tool in itself. So what we'll do is, I know that this momentum equation is applicable at all points along a distance x. At all points would mean that at first of all it's applicable at any distance x, but it's also applicable at any distance y, right? So I need not be inside the boundary layer, but I can actually be outside. So I can be in the quiescent fluid and I can still apply this momentum equation. Now it so happens that when I move outside the zone where this fluid is rising, so in the quiescent part, in this zone here, the velocities are 0. And that's because the fluid is quiescent. So u and v become 0 there, because of which all these terms will actually vanish, and all we'll be left with is a pressure gradient and a buoyant and a gravity or a body force. In the quiescent region, we have u and v are 0, because of which we can write minus 1 by rho infinity, because the density there is rho infinity, dp dx to be equal to g. So the pressure gradient becomes, at any given location, is minus rho infinity g. So now we can plug this in here and then move on. Okay, so we'll write u du dx plus v du dy would be, so now if I plug it in, and the negative sign will anyway cancel, so we'll have rho infinity by rho into g, and I also have a g on the other, there's one more g here, so I can combine with that, and so this becomes rho infinity minus rho by rho infinity, or by rho, sorry, by rho into g plus nu d2u dy square. That becomes the x momentum equation for this problem. So we have the regular inertia terms, we have the viscous term, but we also have now the buoyancy force in the governing equation. to move forward from this point, we introduce another parameter. We introduce what is called as a volumetric thermal expansion coefficient, which is beta. And beta is defined as the relative change in density with temperature at a constant pressure. So it's defined as the relative change in density with temperature at a constant pressure. Okay, so the subscript P would denote that P is constant. So, so I can approximate beta, or I can just maybe write it here itself. I could approximate this as minus 1 by rho. So I can say that I'm working very close to, so the change is very small at a given pressure. So I can write this as rho infinity minus rho by T infinity minus T. So for a small change from the quiescent condition. And so what this does is it gives me rho infinity minus rho, which becomes beta rho T minus T infinity. So the change in density, which I actually have here, which I have here in the buoyancy force, rho infinity minus rho, I am now going to replace by this expression, which is in terms of temperature. So we get now the momentum equation is u du dx plus v du dy, and so there is a rho in the denominator, so that cancels off. So we'll have beta t minus t infinity into g plus nu d2u dy square. So why did we do this? First of all, I mean, I've taken you through these steps, and why did we even go, and why do we even care about this? The important part was that when we started the governing equations, we had a we had the body force, which is of course in terms of density, right? But we didn't have any other equation for density. Okay, we didn't have anything else so as to say. Now, by introducing the volumetric thermal expansion coefficient, what I've done is I've converted the density term into temperature. So now I have a close correlation between temperature and momentum. So there's a correlation between T and U and V. And the correlation is actually quite strong, because if you see this, if you see the final governing equations that we have in our system, in addition to the x momentum, we'll have the continuity equation to solve, and we will also have the energy equation to solve. So we'll have u dt dx plus v dt dy to be alpha times d2t dy square, if we neglect, let's say we neglect viscous dissipation. So what we see in this set of equations, or what we see in these set of equations, is that the the energy equation and the momentum equation are very strongly coupled. Earlier, we could actually solve the momentum equation independently and then use the u and v into in the energy equation. But now what I see is that the energy equation, the variable in the energy equation, which is temperature, is itself influencing the momentum equation. So these are a set of equations that are strongly coupled, and they must be solved simultaneously. So this is a strongly coupled set of equations that must be solved simultaneously. Now, to know a little bit about beta, because I've introduced this parameter, if you look at beta, which I said was the relative change in density at a constant pressure. Uh, so this for an ideal gas has a very clean form. For an ideal gas, P will be rho RT. So when we write beta, which is minus 1 by rho d rho dt at a constant pressure, I could write this as, now remember P, if P is rho RT, then d rho dt could be written as minus P by RT square, sorry, RT square, because P is constant. And so we get, so P by rho RT becomes 1, and so this just becomes 1 by T. So for an ideal gas, beta goes as 1 by temperature. So if temperature is high, beta would be small. If temperature is low, beta will be high. So as to say. We'll also make this assumption for most of the problems that we do in this part of the uh, in this part of this course, that we will mostly assume beta is 1 by T. Okay, so please keep this in mind. Now, going to the next part now in this analysis, if I look at these equations again, if I look at, just concentrate my attention to these equations. So I said we need to solve these set of equations together or simultaneously. So it's always preferable, which I've been saying throughout this course, it's always preferable to solve uh, such equations in the non-dimensional form instead of the dimensional form, so that they can be applied to a range of different conditions and to a range of fluids, not just one specific case. So we can, as usual, we can non-dimensionalize these governing equations, and the non-dimensionalization could be done using some characteristic scales. So for instance, x can be non-dimensionalized with respect to some length scale. L could be the length of the plate. The same scale also can be applied on y. Okay, so L is some characteristic length in the problem. It could be the length of the plate. It could be, as we'll see, there are also free convection from curvilinear bodies such as cylinders and spheres. So that could be the diameter. It's not very important right now. The velocity could be non-dimensionalized with respect to some characteristic velocity u naught, except, or some reference velocity u naught, except I don't know what that u naught is as of now. Okay, it is some velocity scale. What is it? We will talk about it very soon. U naught is some reference, but let's say unknown velocity. So, and of course, this is temperature as well. So T star could be written as T minus T infinity by Ts minus T infinity. So that becomes the temperature scale for this, for the non-dimensionalization. So if you use these factors now and try and non-dimensionalize our governing equations, you should get, and I'm not doing this, but you should get the following equations, or the x momentum specifically should turn out like this. The x momentum will give you u star du star dx star plus v star du star dy star to be g beta ts minus t infinity into L by u naught square t star plus uh, nu by u naught L d2 u star dy star square. So what you see as u naught square here is actually come from here, because there's a u naught here which will come from this term, and there's a u naught that will come from this term. So that is why we see a u naught square here, and L basically because there's a length here, so that L comes out when you multiply, it goes to the right side. I hope you can figure this out. Okay, so this is a set. This is a non-dimensional momentum equation or x momentum equation. Now I know that we have non-dimensionalized variables, so this left-hand side is completely a non-dimensional function or a non-dimensional quantity. In the right-hand side, I already see the presence of the Reynolds number. So this is 1 by REL, or the Reynolds number based on the length scale, right? U naught L by nu. So clearly, and of course, d to u dy square dy star square is also non-dimensional number now. T star is a non-dimensional number. So clearly, this number here, this that we have, should also be a non-dimensional number. Except, except it's in terms of a velocity, which I said is a reference velocity, but I don't know that velocity. So what? So since I don't know that velocity, and it matters, because when you define some non-dimensional numbers, it matters. Everyone can make their own choice of a velocity scale. So to get rid of that ambiguity, what we can do is multiply this number, which is g beta ts minus t infinity into L by u naught square. If I multiply that by the square of the Reynolds number, if I multiply this by u naught L by nu square, right? That's the square of the Reynolds number. So if I multiply it this way, I can actually get rid of u naught from this problem, or from this, or I can get rid of this ambiguity with regard to what is the dimension or what is the scale of this velocity. So if we do this, of course, u naught gets cancelled, and what we get is g beta ts minus t infinity L cube by nu square. This number that we have now derived, I can say this is called as a Grashof number. The Grashof number has pretty much the same significance in free convection that or same significance in free convection that Reynolds number has in forced convection. Quite importantly, Grashof number is sort of the ratio of the buoyancy force. It's a ratio of the buoyancy force to the viscous force. So you can see that the buoyancy is there on the numerator, right? Because that is, this whole term accounts for buoyancy. And then this, because we spoke about the Reynolds number, and there is a viscous force in the denominator, so we get the viscous force here in the Grashof number. Okay. Now, so that is the Grashof number. Now, clearly, if I also write the energy equation in the non-dimensional form, what we will get is u star dt star dx star plus v star dt star dy star to be 1 by REL Prandtl number d2 t star dy star square. That will be the energy equation when we just work out the same steps in this analysis. So if I see this now, that the Nusselt number, because the Nusselt number comes through the solution of the velocity field and the temperature field, both both are required to calculate the Nusselt number for this problem. Clearly, Nusselt number in this scenario now will be a function of the Reynolds number, Prandtl number, and the Grashof number. Now, generally, we talk about free convection in fact, or rather, let me say, we talk about forced convection. If I look at this number, if I look at Grashof number, ratio of Grashof number to the Reynolds number square, if this number is much less than 1, if Grashof to Reynolds number square is much less than 1, we basically say that forced convection dominates. Which basically means that buoyancy effects are much smaller as compared to inertia in the fluid. Okay, and if forced convection dominates, it means that Nusselt number will not show a dependence on Grashof number. And so the analysis or the correlations that we have developed or we looked at in the case of forced convection would become applicable. But if Grashof number to Reynolds number square is much more than 1, that means buoyancy dominates over inertia in the flow. Then we talk about free convection. So we can say free convection dominates, and in which case Nusselt number would then become a function of, as I'll show you, another number which is the Rayleigh number and the Prandtl number. The Rayleigh number is basically Grashof number times Prandtl. There's another thing that I have to bring in for this. Now, strictly speaking, Grashof by Reynolds number square should actually be infinity, which means that there should be no inertia in the flow for free convection to dominate. But when we have to make an engineering judgment, we look at this ratio to say whether free convection is there or whether forced convection is to be used. Okay, but do remember, the main part of doing this is actually to sensitize you that Grashof number has the same role as a Reynolds number. So Grashof number is in free convection, what Reynolds number is in forced convection. Okay, so it takes these change their roles or the names depending on the problem that we are working with. Okay, now the solution to these equations is quite tedious. I have written down energy equation here. The momentum equation is also there, and then of course we have continuity equation, which would be du star du star dx star plus dv star dy star to be 0. So that is anyway there. So these three equations are very difficult to solve analytically, and I would not attempt to do it here. But I would actually just show you that for laminar flow on a vertical plate, there does exist a way of doing this, but it is not purely analytical. It is semi analytical, that it does rely on numerical solution of the equation eventually, but the equations can actually be cast in the form of only one independent variable by using the method of similarity. And so a similarity solution does exist for this problem as well. For free convection, uh, let's say I would also squeeze in laminar, because this is not true for turbulent. For laminar free convection over a vertical plate, and it happens because we introduce a similarity variable eta, which goes as y by x into Grashof x by 4 to the power 1/4. The 4 is introduced in the denominator for convenience, as you will see. In fact, it doesn't need not be there, but it's introduced to ensure that we get a certain solution, or we don't get those numbers just hanging around in the differential equation. So with this, we also define a stream function which is only a function of eta, which could be written as some function of eta into 4 new Grashof at a distance x by 4 raised to 1 by 4. By the way, when I say Grashof with subscript x, it basically means Grashof calculated with x as the length scale, not L as the length scale. So using these two quantities, the momentum equation is reduced to, first of all, using these two, you can prove that the continuity equation will be satisfied. Then the momentum equation will be x momentum, by the way, will turn out into a third order ordinary differential equation, which is nonlinear. So the x momentum equation will turn out to be d3f d eta cube plus 3f d2f d eta square minus 2f or df d eta square plus t star is 0. That is the x momentum. And the energy equation becomes a second order ordinary differential equation. So we'll get d2 t star t eta square plus 3 times Prandtl f of eta dt star d eta is 0. So we get two ODs, one in F, one in T, and it just becomes a matter of solving them. Then they are coupled, by the way. So it just becomes a matter of solving them. And so the solution typically followed is to solve it using numerical methods, such as Runge-Kutta type methods. So you can convert them into more number of first order differential equations and try and solve them numerically, which is again not something that I'm not going to do here. But I'm just going to say that the Nusselt number, when you solve this equation numerically, the Nusselt number at a distance x, which would be written as hx by k, will come out to be Grashof number by 4 to the power 1 by 4 into some function of Prandtl. Okay, a function which is only of Prandtl number, and the average Nusselt number over a distance L would be 4 by 3 times the Nusselt number or the local Nusselt number at that point. So if I have the local Nusselt number variation, I can always calculate the average heat transfer coefficient up to that location. So this kind of data is actually available in the book. Okay, so it is given in the form of charts, and I'm not repeating them here. I don't think I will ever ask you to look up data from the chart to solve any problem. Rather, we'll look at some simple correlations that can allow us to make these, do these calculations far more easily and more accurately. Now, very similar to forced convection over a flat surface, free convection can also become turbulent beyond a certain distance. So, at some distance xc, the laminar. So, at some distance x subscript c, free convection can become turbulent, or the flow can become turbulent if I am more precise. And this change in the flow from laminar to turbulent in terms of its characteristics is correlated in terms of the Rayleigh number. So as I said, we have a new number in this case as well, which is the Rayleigh number, which is typically defined as Ra. So the Rayleigh number up to a distance x is typically written as Grashof number up to that distance times Prandtl number. Now note that the Grashof number had a nu square in the denominator, and Prandtl number will have nu in the numerator. If you recall just from what we've done, so this comes out to be g beta ts minus t infinity x cube by nu alpha. Okay, and the critical Rayleigh number at which transition happens to turbulence is about 10 to power 9. Well, that's the rule of thumb, that about at about the Rayleigh number of about 10 to power 9, we get transition from laminar flow to a turbulent flow in free convection flow over a vertical plate. Now, your book does something which I'm not a big fan of, but let me just say this, or these are much older ways of doing these calculations. Most correlations in free convection flows are written in the following form. So you will see that Nusselt number would be written as, which is h bar L by k, would be written as c some constant times Rayleigh number up to that distance raised to some factor n. This is the most what should I say, most common form of writing free convection correlations. Where Rayleigh number, when I say is up to, is for defined for length L, that means you just replace x by L, and so that is the Rayleigh number up to distance L. And this coefficient n depends on whether the flow is laminar or turbulent. So n is typically taken to be 1 by 4 if the flow is laminar, or Rayleigh number is less than 10 to power 9, and it's taken as 1 by 3 for turbulent flows. And all properties that we see in the Rayleigh number definition, such as beta, nu, alpha, they are actually measured at, or they are calculated or determined at the film temperature. So properties come at Ts, or the average of Ts and T infinity. That is the film temperature. But these correlations can actually show large errors. These are very these are simplistic ways of writing these heat transfer correlations. A more precise correlation for vertical plate, which we will, and I will recommend that for this class, a precise way of calculating h bar for the case of heat transfer from a vertical plate is using the correlation of Churchill and Chu. It's a long and tedious correlation, so I'm not going to repeat it here. I will, as I said, the TAs will actually give you a list of all the correlations that we need. So the reason I'm more comfortable or more inclined towards this correlation is that this is applicable for a range of for a range of RAL, or range of Rayleigh numbers, for a wide range of the Rayleigh number, and which is what we will rely on for this class. Slightly more tedious, but it doesn't take much time. If you get the properties at the film temperature, then it is actually just a matter of plugging them in and calculating some exponents. Some exponents appear which are strange powers. So, but that's because the data has been fitted, or the correlation has been fitted to the data that was available. Okay, so we looked at free convection from a vertical plate. Let me bring in new or a different scenario, which is free convection, say from an inclined plate. What happens when the plate is inclined? And what I mean by that is, say that our plate was like this. Okay, say it is suspended by some way in some fluid, gravity is downwards, and the angle this plate makes with the vertical is, let's say, theta. Okay, and I'm going to do this very qualitatively. I'm not going to do any analysis on this, but I want to rather show you what happens when you have a plate like this being held at an angle to gravity. And just for making it interesting now, let's say the plate surface temperature or the plate temperature is, let's say, less is lower than the free stream or the quiescent temperature. So the surrounding fluid is at T infinity, but the plate is at a lower temperature as compared to T infinity. So what do we expect now? Now let me look at what happens on either side of the plate. Let me look at the top surface first because that is easier to understand. Now, if the plate is at lower temperature as compared to the ambient, and of course this is on both sides. Okay, please don't think that I've drawn T infinity on one side, so it is only one side, but it is on both sides. So if T infinity is more than Ts, clearly the fluid coming in contact with the top surface will actually cool down, and then it will actually flow downwards because the density will become higher, and so it will actually go down, and the relatively warmer fluid will come and displace it. So we'll have on the top surface a similar behavior as we've seen so far, that we'll have fluid moving downwards along that plate. And what the reason this happens in this way is that on the top surface, that gravity acts against the top surface. So gravity ensures that the gravity ensures that the boundary layer remains in contact with the surface throughout. Gravity will ensure that this will just keep going down because the plate is actually anyway bounding it bounds the, or it is doesn't allow the flow to go anywhere else. But even though this happens in this way, remember that the effective component of gravity along the plate is actually g cosine theta. So the force that we are going to see here along this direction is g cosine theta. So it is not the same force, but it is a lower force because of which the velocities are smaller or lower, and so the heat transfer rate is also low as compared to if the plate was vertical. So that happens on the top surface. Now what about the bottom surface? Same thing again, that the fluid will come in contact with the cooler surface, and so it will actually cool down, it would want to go downwards, but it cannot now stick to the surface throughout because there's no bounding surface, so it will actually not roll so cleanly as it does on the top surface, but rather it would get detached, or the boundary layer development will be interrupted. And so what we will see is some detached flow which would look like this. So we'll see flow getting detached from the lower surface, and leaving in the form of bundles. So as long as the boundary layer remains, I would say, thin, it remains in contact, but as soon as it grows, it tends to depart the surface and it can no longer stay attached. The fluid leaves, and then again some fluid comes in at starts, or the boundary layer starts growing again, it gets detached. So you have this interrupted nature, and this is actually a very three-dimensional flow, because you can imagine, if you put a plate like this, you would not just see it so neatly in two-dimensional form, you will actually see it in three-dimensional form. So you'll have a three-dimensional, sort of like a funnel leaving, or a cone leaving the surface. And because the flow keeps getting detached from the bottom surface, we also get a very high heat transfer. Now similar trend would also be associated with the heated plate. If I put a heated plate this is maybe a quiz question to you. You can think it over. If I had a heated plate instead of a cooler plate, you can very well see that on a heated plate, the situation will completely flip. That what you see on the top surface of the plate on a cooler plate will actually now happen on the bottom surface, and what you see on the bottom surface here will actually happen on the top surface. Because again, heated plate would mean that the fluid will actually have a low density. It will want to rise. It will want to rise because of buoyancy, and then if the plate is happens to be in the direction impeding that rising motion, then it will stay attached. If there's no plate and there's nothing to stop it from rising, it will actually detach. Now that is for a inclined plate. Let's look at what happens on a horizontal plate. So say we again take this example that, say we have a free stream fluid which is at T infinity, and it's exposed to a plate, and it's exposed to a plate, let's say, which is a cooler plate as compared to the quiescent fluid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insulate this plate on the other side, so there is no scope for anything else. It's only exposed to the surrounding fluid on one side of the plate. So what I'm saying is this is Ts, which is less than T infinity. Now what do we expect? Now you can imagine that as the fluid sees the cooler plate, it starts coming down, and more significantly, as it comes down, especially fluid in the center of the plate, let's say fluid here, which is somewhere in the center of the plate, as it cools down, there is nowhere for it to escape. So what it would do is the fluid will actually start moving along the plate. So the fluid that comes out will start moving along the plate until you get to the ends where the fluid then escapes. And by the way, I should have drawn gravity, because that's, otherwise how would I even explain this? So it would start coming down, it would escape from the end. So we expect, or we can expect, that this kind of a flow should be what would happen on this plate. So the fluid will actually come down, and so at the center it would actually move along the plate. So here, somewhere here, that as I was saying, somewhere here, it will actually move along the plate, and then it would have to leave from the ends. Okay, so the movement of the fluid is going to be impeded by the presence of the plate, because of which you get higher resistance to heat transfer, and so the heat transfer coefficient is not at effect, or the heat transfer is not that effective. And you can also expect the same trend if the plate was hotter as compared to the ambient fluid, but I only expose the bottom surface to the quiescent fluid. So the exact opposite of this, right? So this will also be true, or the same thing will happen. Same thing can be expected from bottom surface of a heated plate. So since we are on a cold plate, let's just take one last example. Say if the plate was again cool, but this time I look at what happens from the bottom surface of this cool plate, which is insulated on the other side. And we have a quiescent fluid, or we have a fluid which is at temperature T infinity, where Ts is less than T infinity. So we have a bottom surface of a cold plate that is exposed to the quiescent fluid. Now this is actually good, because as the fluid comes in contact, with the cold surface, it becomes cooler, and so its density rises or density increases, it would actually float down, and then a hotter or a warmer fluid will come and displace it. So this is quite an effective scenario, because in this scenario, in this case now, we expect heat transfer to be more effective, because the colder fluid can go down, and the hotter fluid or the warmer fluid can come and occupy its place. So there is much more heat transfer in this scenario as compared to the earlier one that I've shown on the left side. So you will have much higher heat transfer rate. And the same thing will also happen if you're dealing with the upper surface of a heated plate. So if Ts was more than T infinity, but we were dealing with the upper surface, the same thing is also true. Now, in your book, you will see that the correlations for such scenarios are defined in terms of a characteristic length. So correlations are given in terms of a characteristic length, which is defined as the ratio of the surface area to perimeter of the plate. Okay, so as we if we know the size of the plate, we can actually put this characteristic length in those correlations and use those correlations to calculate how much would be the heat transfer from such scenarios. Okay, so I have just one more. Give me just one more minute. Just let me just wrap up this whole discussion now. The last thing that you can also do is, or which I wanted to discuss, was to look at free convection from a curvilinear body, such as a cylinder. So, say we have a cylinder, right, which is at some temperature, let's say Ts, which is more than the surrounding fluid temperature, right? And then if we want to look at how heat transfer happens from the cylinder, so there's a first of all there's a correlation by Churchill and Chu again, which can be applied here, except the correlation is now in terms of the diameter of this cylinder. And it's also true for sphere as well. There is a correlation for sphere, where the diameter is again the characteristic length in the problem. And in this case now, what we expect is that if Ts is more than T infinity, the bottom surface or the bottom pole, if I can say it, is the place where the heat transfer offers least resistance, because there the cooler fluid comes in contact with the hotter surface, because of which its density changes and it starts rising. So it starts rising, and I'm going to draw it in a slightly exaggerated way. So it starts rising, and then at some point it rises as a plume. So the same thing will happen on the other side. On this side, the drawing is very poor. So it rises as a plume, and so the Nusselt number is typically written as in terms of the function of the angle theta. So we can write Nusselt number as an angle or as a function of theta, and that Nusselt number will actually change. Okay, so Nusselt number will be maximum, in fact, at this pole, and it will start decreasing as you go away, because the resistance to heat transfer is increasing. The film is actually, or the hottest fluid is actually becoming thicker, so you have higher resistance to heat transfer. And in this case, the flow transition happens at about so the flow transition from laminar to turbulent flow at about Rayleigh number of 10 to power 9. This is for transition from laminar to turbulent flow. Okay, anyway, but this is something that is just there's not much physics to be discussed here, but I just wanted to let you know that these are also available, and there's also a correlation for sphere. Okay, thank you.